Hi there, welcome to the show. It's Ben Ashworth at Athletic Shoulder, and today on the show we've got Danny Wilson from Boxing Science. Hello Danny, how are you doing?
Hi Ben. Yeah, all good, thank you. How about yourself?
Very good mate. As you said before we got on air, we've both been rushing around this morning for different reasons, but it's all good. Glad we got here. Um, Mate, for the listeners that don't know you, can you just maybe let's break down a bit of your background and what brings you to this point in your career?
Yeah, well, first of all, thank you for having me on the podcast. You've had some big names and some clever people on there, a lot cleverer than me. But hopefully, I can give you some insights to the world of boxing. So, my background is that I've been working as a strength and conditioning coach for 13, 14 years now. My passion was for training. I was a pretty good footballer. Some people now say I weren't that good, but I think I was pretty good. One of them typical fails, like academy trials kind of people. Got into training, wanted to get as massive as possible, thinking about like going into like the personal training route or like as a PE teacher, and then I just discovered this thing called strength and conditioning, wanting to work with athletes, motivated people, wanting to improve their performances, motivated as like kind of what I was like going into the gym. So I started working in strength and conditioning. My main goal was to work in boxing because the main reason why I got into training in the first place is because I watched all the Rocky films. And when I was 12 and 13 years old, I just wanted to do hundreds of sit-ups, train like a boxer, go out on big runs, listen to the Rocky music at the same time. So that's the main reason why I got into like physical training in the first place. So when I saw a boxing strength and conditioning coach called Alex Ariza working with Manny Pacquiao and Amir Khan, I looked at that and said that is a perfect job for me. However, there was not many avenues into professional boxing, amateur boxing at that point, mainly due to like kind of old school training. So that gave me the motivation not only to be a strength and conditioning coach in that space, but also to have a wider impact on the sport. So after like building up some experience in football, in university sports, I was with the professional rugby league team for a bit of time as well. Like I said, working with a range of different sports in university, like volleyball and basketball and canoe polo, which is like such a random sport. Still don't think to this day I've seen anybody play canoe polo. But yeah, a wide range of sports, wide range of experiences, which kind of led me to the point where, right, I want to work with boxers now. And there was a university level boxer working in the gym. And I just went up to them one day and just said, I really want to work with boxers. Can I work with you for free? He's obviously said yes. And then that led me to work with Brendan Warburton, who's the head coach at Sheffield City ABC. He got me to work with some of his fighters. Then I started doing a small group class on a Saturday morning, £3.50 a session. And from there, it just grew and grew and grew with me working with professional fighters. We did the testing battery, which kind of gave us like that grounding, that scientific grounding to go, right, this is how we need to work with boxers, amateur and professional. And that led us to want to share that message and have an impact on the sport. We knew that doing the sports science research and putting a peer-reviewed article, not many coaches or athletes are actually going to pick up the latest journal of strength and conditioning research to like update themselves on the latest training trends and everything like that, especially within boxing. So we decided to launch Boxing Science, which primarily was a website to share articles on strength and conditioning, sports psychology, nutrition, everything to help with physical and mental preparation for boxing and also combat sports as well. And obviously, we fast forward to 2025, a lot of the like kind of online market is not just websites, it's also social media, Instagram, YouTube, particularly grew during lockdown, a lot of engagement through that. And with that growth, we was at Sheffield Hallam University in the early years between 2014 and 2020. And then after lockdown, it was kind of the clean break that we needed. And that's why we moved ourselves to a separate facility, which is just on the outskirts of Sheffield, Boxing Science Performance Centre, where we are hosting a range of different fighters, from people having their first bout all the way through to world title challengers and champions. We have around about 15 boxers that come in on a one-to-one basis, and quite regular. But we also, like, because of our location, it's just literally just off the M1, about an hour away from the airport. We have people travelling in from all over to come and train, do their testing, do our educational workshops as well. The furthest that somebody's travelled for one of our workshops is from Mexico, coming all the way to officially Barnsley, to come to one of our workshops. So we do a range of different things at Boxing Science. Like I said, we train champions, we do our testing and research, we try and get as much work done with youth athletes in terms of research and also training services as well. And then also we've got our educational platforms, which is online, our online mentorships, and also we do our in-person workshops that we host mostly at Boxing Science, but we also do international as well.
Mate, what a journey! I love the story behind it. In fact, I didn't know all of that, so that's great for me to find out as well. We've spent time together in Barnsley or near Barnsley. I imagine it was a cultural shock for the Mexican boxer to come to Barnsley, but I hope you took him for some scraps and some fish and chips locally. Mate, so it's an Athletic Shoulder podcast, and that's why we're here. You and I have had some great discussions. We spent the day together at your facility. I really enjoyed that with your team, and just, for me, it's about working with good people and understanding and learning about a sport, and you've got way more knowledge than I think most, or if not anybody that I've spoken to in this area. So bringing it back to Athletic Shoulders, and that's important. How do you kind of see, and based on some of the discussions we've had, but how do you see the relevance of the shoulder in a boxing context? And let's start from a performance perspective, because I think that's where people tend to want to go.
Okay, yeah. So from a boxing perspective, the shoulders are really important. One, obviously, to deliver a fast and hard punch, but also from an injury prevention point of view. Probably the most prevalent injury that I see, that I have to deal with, is with the shoulder. So let's talk about kind of what it takes to deliver a fast and hard punch before we go into actually why that is such a problem area for boxers. So, how do we know that, why it's a forceful punch? Well, we're looking at the research where there's a range of different studies, some old, some new, where they look at kind of what forces a boxer is going to create during a punch. Now, there's a range of different research, and it can range between 2,000 to 4,000 newtons in a single punch. Now, that equates to around about 3.5 times body weight. So if we compare that to other sports, such as like rugby, in a rugby scrum, you're likely to hit about 2 times your body weight of force. During like a baseball pitch, you've had Eric Cressy on the podcast as well, a lot of work around the shoulder with that. That's around about 1.7 times your body weight in terms of force that they're able to produce. So that's showing, like, kind of with boxing, very large amounts of forces. Now, to give you a bit of context, what 4,000 newtons looks like, so this is the highest score that we've seen, and this is like from a very old study, including the old British heavyweight world champion Frank Bruno. So one of the favourites. Some of the older heads, like me and you, Ben, will know who Frank Bruno is. Some of the younger ones might not know, but Frank Bruno, a legend of the sport, really hard puncher. He hit 4,000 newtons on this sports science study. Now, with some of the challenges with boxing, it's quite difficult to do sports science research, isn't it? And we're probably going to talk about this in the podcast. So a lot of the stuff that we do at Boxing Science is just trial and test, having a play about in the gym and doing our own case studies. And we tried to replicate the same amount of force that Frank Bruno did in this study, 4,000 newtons, with, at the time, English strongest man. It's now the UK strongest man, Paul Smith, who you might have seen on Channel 5 at Christmas, the world's strongest man. And we got him to hit a force plate with a sledgehammer and he got nowhere near with it. So that's how much force that a heavyweight boxer can produce. And when we spent that day at Boxing Science, we were talking about what a boxer's shoulder has to deal with. I showed you the clip of the recent clip of Fabio Wardley hitting David Adelaide with the knockout shot, and the amount of force and rotational force that he's having to produce there is just incredible. So large amounts of force, very short amount of time. But the main thing is as well is like how many punches that a boxer is actually throwing in a fight, and that's something that I'll come to in a short bit. So in terms of like how do they produce this force, so we're saying about Fabio like producing that force, that primarily come from the lower body and rotational force. Now we say something, and a lot of your listeners will already know this, kinetic chain sequencing, and this really relies, the punch really relies on kinetic chain sequencing. The first time somebody goes into a boxing gym, they punch the bags, and it's all arm punches, because they're thinking that obviously the delivery of the punch relies on the arms. But the first point of call for any boxing coach is to say the punch comes from the feet first. It comes through a slight squat of the lower body, a rapid rotation of the hips, rapid rotation of the torso, and then you're almost like whipping the punch through. Now it's quite difficult to say what percentage of like transfer that each one has in terms of like getting an EMG device on the lower body through the trunk and everything like that. It's quite difficult to say, but like what we can do is make some sort of correlations. With each athlete it's different, but primarily we're looking at lower body force, lower body rate of force development. We're also looking at lean muscle mass of the trunk being a strong contributor towards punching force. We're going to talk about in a short while, talking about rotational strength and peak force and rate of force development. So a lot of the power and strength actually comes from the lower body and the torso. Now, with our original study, the Boxing Science Testing Battery back in 2014, we did looking at lean muscle mass of using an in-body machine, using the BIA machine, and we found that lean muscle mass of the trunk was the biggest contributor towards a med ball punch throw, estimated punch force. We also saw that the next contributing factor was lower body muscle mass, which had a medium to strong correlation, and then a weak correlation with estimated punch force was muscle mass of the upper limb. And also we saw weak correlations between a maximal push-up test with the punch throw. However, we saw in the jump assessments, can't move a jump, squat jump, a strong correlation. So basically, we're seeing the lower body and the trunk being the primary contributors towards punching force. Now, the upper body comes through as a little bit like a whip. So there's little activation through delivery of the punch through the upper body. And with that comes a lot of problems for that upper limb, because it has to basically deal with that impact force, being able to create that snap at the end range of the punch, and create them impact forces, deal with a lot of decelerations if a punch misses, but actually the contribution from this area is minimal compared to the lower body and the trunk. So it almost becomes a victim and becomes like inflamed and everything like that due to the forces that are created from the lower body and the trunk. And that's the reason why like a lot of people end up getting shoulder injuries. Now, probably the key thing, like I say, about what we do at Boxing Science, we do a lot of case studies, in-house research. The main piece of research that we did around movement and mobility is that we tested 160 youth boxers at England Boxing, so they were high performers, and we did an overhead squat assessment, and from this we saw that 66% of these boxers exhibited tight and overactive shoulders. So that's a large, like significant finding there. And a main thing that we're seeing is youth boxers. So these have shorter training histories compared to your professional boxers. So they've probably been training for 5, maybe 10 years. Professional boxers might have been training for 10, 15, maybe even 20 years. So they're creating these imbalances for a longer period of time. And with this, we saw that mainly looking at that overhead range, but also we saw an imbalance between lead hand and backhand. So a lot more tightness in the lead hand rather than the backhand. Now the reason why this happens is because the lead hand is used a lot more than the backhand. So in a recent fight, Beterbiev versus Bivol, they're actually having the rematch this weekend, depending on when this podcast comes out. But Beterbiev won, and probably one of the reasons why he won is because he threw 1,023 punches in 12 rounds. So nearly 100 punches around. And looking at like the distribution of these punches, 70% of these were used with the lead hand. So we're looking at like a 7-to-3 ratio, or 3.5 to 1.5 ratio. Now, with his opponent, Bivol, he threw about 77% from the lead hand to the backhand, so even more so. So that was in a fight scenario where you're probably likely to try and throw a lot more power punches because you're in the hurt business. So you're probably looking to land your backhand more. Whereas like in training, like I've always theorised that it'd be a 3-to-1 or even 5-to-1 ratio in terms of how often you use your lead hand to your backhand, because you're often just practising that lead hand work. There's a lot of like kind of drills that you can do in terms of lead hand only on the bag, just working on your jab in particular, lead hand sparring and everything like that. So you can see that they are probably going to use this ratio a lot more. And also, if you're throwing 1,000 punches in a round, 1,000 punches around, bumming out their fit, 1,000 punches in a fight, which is only 12 3-minute rounds. Often in boxing training, you're probably going to be throwing a lot more, especially when you're working on the bags and pads. And you're doing this 4 or 5 times a week. There's going to be a huge anterior dominance there, a lot of disproportion between your lead hand and your backhand, and there's very little kind of balancing act that you can do. And this is what I always say to coaches and to athletes. All we're trying to do is create some sort of balance between the demands, the heavy demands of the sport in terms of high impact, such as high volume of punches that have been thrown during their boxing training, to the mobility work that you're actually doing. So the mobility work, if you're just doing like a little stretch here and there, a little warm up, not really giving it as much thought or as much purpose, as much intent, then this balancing act between how kind of cramped up that you're going to be in that anterior shoulder complex, how much shoulder pain that you're going to have as well. The balance is going to be too much, and that's where athletes are going to get injured. Now, what I say to athletes and coaches is just try and do something every single day. We have the boxing science warm-up. Try and do that every single day. Try and do it before your boxing training, conditioning, your strength and conditioning training, where you're just creating a little bit more balance there. And then doing a lot more strength training, especially around the posterior shoulder. Trying to work the decelerators instead of working the accelerators all the time, and being more mindful around what you actually do to expose that upper limb. A lot of our pressing exercises are done with dumbbells and done single arm, done unilaterally. A lot of them are in limited and compromised positions rather than like just getting them to lift overhead, because we know that 66% of the time that boxer's going to have a weaker overhead range. That means that they're going to be compensating. So we use a lot of landmine work when working particularly the shoulders. And like I said, with the horizontal pressing, primarily use dumbbells, because like when we're using the bench, that internal rotation, humeral head, a lot of compressive forces going through that AC joint. If we're ever going to do anything on a bench, we probably do it in a floor press or racked position, or even better, doing it in an isometric position. So there's a lot of things to go into, probably not something that we can cover in one single podcast. But yeah, it's a very complicated. Yeah, like I'm talking in a very general standpoint here. Like I said, like 66% showed an overhead squat, and we know that there's more to find out about the shoulder, and this is why we've been working together to find out a lot more, using the ASH test, using the force frame data from VALD, and I've started doing a lot more. And now what I've seen is that boxers' shoulders are very different from individual to individual. And it's primarily down to what their boxing style is. So you can have many different boxing styles. We talked about that fight between Bertbiev and Bivol. They came from the Soviet background of boxing, both Russian boxers. So, but their styles are very different. How they throw punches is very different. Like Bertbiev is this strong, come-forward fighter, very compact in his punches, whereas Bivol is relaxed and he whips in his punches. So you've got two boxers that have literally come from the same background, and they're very different. Now, we have boxers that come from many different backgrounds in terms of their boxing style. So we might have a boxer that is got a tight stance and guard, shoulders have shrugged up and elevated. We'll have boxers that have a very active lead hand, they throw it forward like this and doing a circular motion, a little bit like Usyk, using the lead hand in a very different way. Some might come from a low stance, low guard position and throw the punches, abducting the arm and elevating the arm at the same time. So there's a lot of different styles that can actually have an impact on their shoulder health and the type of shoulder issues that a boxer can exhibit. So that's been really interesting in going more advanced with our testing. We've got a boxer that is very long-limbed and whips in their shots, and we found that kind of that internal strength is lacking instead of external. Whereas like we see a lot more boxers that are more internally biased than externally biased. But with this boxer, because he whips in the shots, there's no need for him to have that internal rotational strength. It's because he's just literally just whipping it in from there and using his long levers to create that power. And that shows the power of using the data. Instead of just using overhead squat, using the ASH test, using the force frame data, is going to be really impactful into our boxers because it's very individualised and we can find out a lot more about them. And we can actually see how it transfers towards their boxing style as well.
Mate, there's so much in there. I love firstly, I love your passion. Secondly, I love your understanding and the technical aspects of boxing that I think get lost there. And from the stuff that we've done together, certainly the technical aspects of how that marries up with what we're going to see when we do some testing. The other thing I think when we're going back to it, this idea of the involvement of the kinetic chain and the clear correlations between lower body and trunk to explosive punching power versus upper limb, and I think it all comes back to the same thing. Is like, how do we break it down into a framework where we can test all of these things? It's maybe seen as slightly reductionist and bringing things into a lower body test or a trunk test or a shoulder test, but as we've discussed before, it can outline where someone has a deficit, whether that's a range of motion deficit, a strength deficit, power deficit. So let's dig into that a little bit. You've done a lot of testing, like you're saying now, and we've talked about our framework and how you test. Can you give some examples maybe around some specific cases where you've identified some areas of weakness, particularly that lead to shoulder issues? And then, obviously, with that testing information, then what do you do about it? How have you gone about changing that particular boxer?
So, from a shoulder specific point of view, I had a boxer once that literally, we'll talk about the boxing science testing battery in a short while, but literally scored like poor or below average on every single test, except from we had 2 greens, 2 excellents. That was in punch power. So you're thinking, wow, everything that I've kind of like said and theorised and everything like that, like jumping higher, punching harder, rotational strength transferring through to the punch, that's all gone out the window with this athlete. Now, what I'm seeing here is a good sign, is that he's got the technique to be able to punch hard without having the physical side. So if I get him physically stronger and more explosive, he's going to be an absolute beast. However, I'm seeing a lot of red flags, because if he's able to punch hard but doesn't have the strength to be able to deal with that, then I've got to be able to try and keep him stable, keep him strong. I'm looking at his shoulder, and this athlete had a lot of shoulder issues. I'm thinking, right, we need to be able to apply the brakes on this and create some stability around his shoulder, because if you're just you're getting a lot of whip through your shoulder, you're getting a lot of power through the landmine punch, we need to work the decelerators a lot. So working a lot around that posterior shoulder. So that's one aspect. Now, looking at like the Ash test, looking at the force frame data, I'm then able to go, right, does this athlete need to work on mobility, stability, what area of their posterior shoulder that we need to work on? And I work through a framework which is very easy. It's mobilise, stabilise, strengthen. So we look to mobilise, mainly looking at overhead range, looking at external and internal range without that internal rotation of the humeral head. We're also looking at rotation. Now, boxers, believe it or not, because they have, it's a rotational sport, they're quite limited through thoracic rotation, because they're quite tight in their shoulders, quite tight in thoracic extension. That means that they're quite tight in thoracic rotation as well. And this is where they start compensating a lot. So a lot of our mobility work is done through rotation, exercises such as eagles, windmills, a half kneeling rotation, a seated like PNF style rotation as well. And then they're primarily the things like the overhead range, external and internal rotation, and looking at rotational mobility as well. Then we're looking at like stability of the shoulder, activation patterns, doing like some sort of plank shoulder touch, doing some lateral like band walks, doing just like literally going up to a wall and with a band to just create some sort of stability and activation around the posterior shoulder blade, learning how to engage and activate the shoulder. They're very basic stuff for stability. And then we do a bit of kettlebell work, so bottoms up kettlebell press to create some stability. I've got some strong, hard like boxers that have come into the program, and their egos have been deflated due to kettlebell bottoms up press when they're just there with the 6 or the 8s and they're shaking like this, and I'm just getting the 16 or the 20, just showing off a little bit. But yeah, just like lack of stability around like, and that's obviously helping with their grip strength, challenging that external rotation as well. So like a kettlebell bottoms up press is fantastic, but then just doing some Swiss ball, like activation work, figure of 8 work and everything like that. That's something that we do. And then just like integrating some stability work in like their core. So like, for example, doing a offset kettlebell, straight arm, straight leg sit up. That's challenging that stability of the shoulders. And then we look to strengthen the shoulders. A lot of it is down to getting stronger, posterior, and just like kind of pressing strength as well. And learning how to actually press from the shoulders. So the key things that I see from when just doing something as simple as a landmine press is that they'll look to shrug up the shoulders, look to kind of laterally flex their neck at the same time. I say that it's the mobile phone in the car situation where they're just literally looking to try and compensate as much as they can. They look to try abduct the shoulder to try and get that strength there. They look to try and twist with it as well. So just literally just learning how to press, keeping that shoulder back and down, keeping that shoulder retracted, and just getting a smooth pressing action. And this sounds really simple. It might sound really simple to the listeners as well. But like I say, I've got boxers that can potentially be throwing punches at 3.5 times the body weight. But when they get that on a landmine press, they've got 20 kilo bar, and I'm lucky, like on the first session, to get a 5 kilo plate on there. So they're lifting only 25 kilos just from a half kneeling position. Now, so that is the position that we're in. So then it's like, right, getting strong in that way, learning how to control it in an eccentric fashion as well. I call a lot of my boxers Jack in the Box because they're wanting to just throw it and not looking to actually control and strengthen. And doing a lot of stuff like single arm as well. So that's how like we look at like trying to improve a boxer. So like I said, most boxers, no matter what, like no matter how they represent in terms of their strength, their power, their robustness, need a bit of TLC on the shoulders.
Yeah, that's certainly my experience, and obviously, you know, it's a bit of a biased view because I end up seeing them when something's gone wrong, right?
Yeah.
And so a lot of the work you're doing is to capture, to screen, to profile. One of the things that I've learned from you is the landmine throw, and particularly around the standards that you set. Now, you know, you don't need to give away all of your gold, but I use this with golfers. I use this with any sort of athlete that's got rotational power, explosive power demands, including a handball player recently who wanted to improve his shot speed. So, can you just talk through the landmine throw and how you've kind of created those standards? That would be really useful for the listeners.
Yeah, so back in 2014, we did the boxing science test in Battery. To create some standardised scores around a range of different tests. So jumping, press-ups, like mentioned, looking at lean muscle mass and fat-free mass, and we're looking at sprint speed as well. The main thing that we needed to work on and try and get standardised for is punch power. Now, punch dynamometers, like to create like some force readings, are very few and far between, and also the accuracy and the validity and reliability of these are quite questionable as well. So not only is it quite expensive, it's also not very reliable and valid as well. So we needed to create a test. So we created the medball punch throw test, and this is from like tennis, a tennis shot put test, and we just included like that lower body rotation instead of using it as a upper body power test. We used it as a lower body core trunk rotation, trying to mimic the punch as much as I can. The only problem with this test is that, one, you need a lot of space. Two, some boxers couldn't throw. So I had a world champion boxer that could punch the hardest, but literally tested so bad on the medball punch throw test. Now this is and also like it was quite hard to make it like reliable data because you're literally there with a broomstick waiting for this ball to land. You're literally like you're in the Olympics with a javelin throw, with a shot put throw, something like that. Whereas like you've got this med ball bouncing around, you've got boxers running around everywhere, and you're trying to get it as accurate as you can. So we had to make a change, and part of that change was to use the landmine punch throw assessment. A lot of like kind of playing about in the gym, and then I decided, right, we're going to use this, and we're going to use a load velocity profile. So not only are we going to get an estimation of hand speed, we're also going to find out what the trend is, what an athlete actually needs to work on from a fast point of view, a speed point of view, or do they need to work on higher loads and a strength point of view. So we get athletes with the 20 kilo bar in the landmine position, we sort them on 20 kilos, we're getting them in a side-on position, always using the backhand. So even if they're working in that alternative stance, they have to switch stance. So even when they go into their lead hand or their left hand, they have to go with their opposite hand in the rear hand position. And they allowed a little bit of dip, and this is attached to a gym wear. So we attach the gym wear to the fulcrum of the bar, and this gives us readings in peak velocity. And basically the athlete is then throwing the 20 kilo bar at the coach, which is mostly me in the gym, and I'm often the victim of some fast and hard punches, throwing the bar 4.4 meters per second. That's probably what our good to excellent mark is. We've had some big punches like hitting 5 to 5.4 meters per second, which is like high amounts of speed and force, especially with a 20 kilo bar. When we first did this was around about 10 years ago now, I decided to do it with Kel Brook, who was a world champion at the time, one of the hardest hitters in British boxing, never mind on the boxing science programme. And I thought, yeah, that'd be a good idea. Let's do the landmine punch throw test with Kel to start off with. And there's some videos on YouTube of me in slow motion trying to catch this 20 kilo bar, and it really hurt my hands. So I weren't used to it then. But like now I'm a little bit more used to it and got a little bit more of a better system. So with this, we did this with a range of different fighters, and we did it with 5 reps on each load on each side. So we're looking at 50 reps in a total testing session. Now this were quite time consuming and quite difficult for the boxers to do. So we decided to try and get that central point, that 30 kilo mark, as our decider of how a trend is going. And so from this now, in our testing battery, we use 20 kilo bar and a 20 kilo bar with 10 kilos on, so 30 kilos in total. Now from this, with our standards, we are then able to see the difference between left and right. We're able to see how they score compared to their peers. So since 2014, we've tested over 600 athletes. So now we're able to compare athletes to their peers. So if they are a 80 kilo senior male boxer, they're able to compare themselves to their peers, basically. There's people in their weight category. So we've got the 20 kilo standard. Then also we've got the 30 kilo standard. Now what we can do from this is determine whether an athlete needs to work on hand speed or they need to work on their strength. So because if we see a decline between 20 and 30 kilos, they're going to see a much bigger decline in a theoretical 40 kilo test. So with this, we're then able to make some decisions on what kind of strength and conditioning that they need from a general point of view and also from a punch-specific point of view. More often than not, people need to work on the strength over the speed. They're very good with the speed, but actually they need to work on their strength as well. But what this actually does for us as well is create some correlations between other physical tests. So we've got our jump tests, which is counter movement jump and squat jump, where we see a 60% transfer, R squared value 0.6 transfer over from jumping height to landmine punch throw peak velocity. We also see that in reactive strength index, which you're not actually needing during that landmine punch throw. You're not actually having to stamp on the floor, but you're needing to create a strong foot, a strong rotation through that foot complex. If that foot is weak, you're not going to be able to transfer that force from that lower body. Then we've got our isometric pull-off press assessment, which we'll talk about a little bit later on. But we've got about 60% transfer in terms of rotational strength to landmine punch throw. Then also we've got a 60% transfer to from grip strength into landmine punch throw. So it's very equal across the board. Now, even though that is very equal across the board in terms of these physical performance tests towards contribution to the punch, every boxer that comes in and tests on the programme looks very, very different. So they might be able to jump high and punch hard, but not be able to rotate as well. They might have really good rotational strength, but not be able to jump high. So then we can make some training decisions, some training goals based off this metrics and how to train that fighter to be able to punch hard. Now we've got loads of different decision trees on if a boxer is able to punch hard but not be able to jump, or is able to jump but not be able to punch hard. Lots of different decisions that we can make around that. So for example, if somebody can jump high but not be able to punch hard, we're then looking at what are they scoring on their rotational strength assessment. They're probably going to be below average or average. Do they need to work on some more kinetic chain sequencing and technical components to be able to transfer that force from the lower body through the core through to the upper body? So there's a lot of different training interventions and training decisions that we can make from this testing.
That's ideal. A really nice breakdown, and yeah, exactly. There's so much individualization in how someone can achieve an outcome, whether it's a throw or a punch. You mentioned this trunk rotation test. I think it's the missing link, isn't it, from a strength perspective? Can you just go into that a little bit and what you're doing there?
Yeah. So our how we got to this position is because when we were at the university, we had the in-body machine. So that is testing your body fat, your fat-free mass, your lean muscle mass, and that lean muscle mass kind of distribution, lower body, trunk, and upper body. And what we found was lean muscle mass of the trunk being the biggest contributor towards the punch. So all them tests that I just talked about, lean muscle mass of the trunk had the highest correlation towards the punching force. So when we're making weight, we want to try and retain as much and maintain as much trunk muscle mass as possible. Now, we don't have an in-body machine at the Boxing Science Performance Centre. We spent all our money on other pieces of equipment. And so we needed to find like some core strength tests. We were doing like the EIS or the UKSCA now, testing that they do with GB Boxing, where they do the trunk capacity holds for the supine, prone, and also they do lateral flexion as well. But what we found with lateral flexion was boxers found it quite difficult to hold and maintain that position. And maybe it's not like primarily a trunk issue, maybe like something around the hips, around the lower back. They just found it uncomfortable and be able to score well in that position. But also what we were thinking is that these are capacity holds, not actually high force, rate of force development tests. So we need to find a way on how can we test peak strength of the core. So we started like experimenting with our pull-off press, isometric pull-off press. This came through lockdown, to be fair, because I was like trying to find high threshold core training without weight, and I would just start doing some isometric pull-off presses against the wall. I had some funny looks because I was in a block of flats at the time. So I was out, we had like a little garden area, and I'm just like finding like different walls to do some isometric training on. So I got a few funny looks and a few funny comments, but I'm like literally doing pull-off presses against the wall. And then I started training people with a small handheld dynamometer, and we're getting a lot more activation, a lot more effort by pressing into this handheld dynamometer against the wall. So we're like thinking, actually, this could be a metric that we could test. But we found that doing maximal contractions towards the back of the hand was actually quite aggravating for the boxers. So we started using a luggage crane on a cable machine. And we were getting peak force values on the luggage crane, doing some isometric pull-off press assessments, trying to rotate as fast and as hard as we can. And then we thought, this could be a study, this. So our assistant coach, Ben, he started doing it, and I was like, you can't be doing a sports science study on a luggage crane. We've got to find something a little bit more reliable. So that's where we got the valve dynamo, and that's where we got not only the peak force but also rate of force development values as well. So we do it like in a standing position on the cable, stack the cable as high as we can, and then looking for them peak force values. So you can actually cheat the system a little bit and just yank it as hard as you can. That's where you get your peak scores, but the scores are just way out there. So we need to create some sort of standard. So we create it by just creating a little bit of slack away, so get it to about 3 or 5 kilos, and then we're trying to rotate as hard as we can, and we're holding that for about 3 seconds, and we take the peak force, we also take the rate of force development values as well, and then from there we can see how that transfers towards punch. And like I just said in the previous question, we've seen about a 60% transfer of the peak rotational strength to the landmine punch throw. Now, what decisions can we make from this is that if they score below average on the peak force on the polar press assessment, right, you need to do more rotational work and make that as a priority. You probably need to work on some capacity holds to start off with, some banded polar press. But then if you score average or just above average, you're probably ready for some more high threshold stuff. So isometrics, 3-second holds, 5-second holds, maybe some heavy, fast pull-off presses, maybe some heavy eccentric work as well. And then that can lead them up to excellent. And then also we use the rate of force development. So if they're strong, if they're really strong, but then rate of force development values aren't great, then we need to make sure that they are working on rotational power. So that's where we're working on the rotational throws, the fast banded rotations and everything, working more ballistically. And even on that rate of force development value as well, we can do some fast and hard isometric rotations. We just said about Fabio Wardley, some scary numbers coming from him in terms of how much it, like when we like doing it the cheat way, where it wasn't on a cable and it was actually on like a luggage rope. We did this in Saudi Arabia ahead of that David Adelaide fight, and I'm literally getting him to just do 1 second isometric contractions, and his rate of force development on them was 1,000 kilos per second. Unbelievable numbers. He hit around about 123 kilos on peak force, which is just ridiculous. So that's the kind of numbers that you can get from when you're cheating the system, in terms of like when you're actually holding, creating that slack first and then going. We're looking at like between like 30 and 50% of an athlete's body weight as our average to excellent markers. But there's still work to be done on this. We started it from a standing position because we were trying to do it from a seated and a kneeling position, and it's an awkward test to do. You've got to be quite comprehensive in the weight room to be able to score really well on it, which is probably a limitation on that, but probably a little bit similar to the isometric mid-thigh pull test. There were a recent study done with boxers, and they said about that lower body peak force transferred to the punch, but not rate of force development. And I'm just like, I know I've trained a lot of boxers, and trying to do isometric mid-thigh pull, they're not going to find that comfortable. Even the guys that I train on a regular basis will find it quite difficult to do. So like when we're talking about this pull-off press assessment, we've got to be quite mindful of training somebody to be able to do it, to make sure that they're competent in doing it to get a valid number.
Well, I think the listeners can see why the two of us get on, because you know your sort of testing battery and the athletic shoulder testing framework seems to go perfectly hand in hand. We speak the same language, and that's why I really enjoyed the time spent with you. By the way, all the stuff that Danny's been demonstrating, he releases a load of really good content on his socials, plus has a really polished system, and you know, it's definitely worth reaching out and looking at what Danny's doing. It's really good in terms of resources. And I remember even seeing recently a video around you and your progressions around that pal off and training around the decisions you've just been talking about. So fantastic stuff, mate. Look, we need to do a part 2 based on the fact that there's so much more to discuss. But right now it's kind of like, well, where can people find you? Like, where's the best place for people to get in touch?
Yeah, cheers, Ben. Sorry for rambling on a little bit too much there. Hopefully we can get a part 2 in the diary. Look, people can find us on Instagram. We've got 2 channels. We've got my own channel, Wilson_Boxing Science, and we've also got @Boxing Science. If people are watching this, you can see that I've got a fancy studio behind me. All the gear and no idea. But we do a lot of work on our YouTube channel, so go and check that out. And also we've got a load more on boxingscience.co.uk in terms of products, services, and also online memberships. And also we've got our mentorship as well. So if anybody wants to get in touch to find out more, especially about the testing, which we've talked a lot about, can contact me, Danny Wilson, at boxingscience.co.uk on my email.